Hello, today we're going to focus on making a circuit using Stripboard. This video is not really about how the circuit works, it's more about making it on Stripboard, how to lay the Stripboard out. Stripboard has an insulator one side, copper on the other side, and the copper is arranged into tracks with a little insulator between each of the tracks. And we're going to interpret the circuit diagram and transfer it onto Stripboard, and then hopefully at the end of all that it will work. So the first thing I always do when I'm doing these is I will look at the circuit diagram, and then on my Stripboard I would decide which track is going to be power and which track is going to be ground. And in this case I've marked them with a pen so that I know that those are the tracks where I connect all of my powers and grounds to. And then I will pick, usually I normally work left to right if I'm able to, the first component, which is a 555 timer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little chip holder like that. Then I'm going to solder that in, and I'm going to make sure that each of the legs of the chip holder are on their own track, not on see, it'll be very difficult to see this until it's soldered, but if you've got all the legs on the same track, that's the wrong way to do it. You want each of the legs to be on its own track. Now, the key to all this is actually the soldering. And my eyesight is absolutely terrible nowadays. I refuse to wear glasses, but I've got a soldering iron set up. What you want to make sure more than anything is that you keep the tip nice and clean, nice and shiny, and that you tin the tip just a little bit. And then the trick is to apply the tip to the component leg and just let the solder feed in, and then you just do that for each one. This is the only time I'm going to show the soldering. If you don't have an extraction fan with you, then you can do what I'm doing, which is breathe in when I'm not soldering and breathe out when I am. That can also help if you're a bit shaky. Sometimes some people have got shaky hands. And then I do the other ones. And so what you'll see is that all of the 8 pins are now soldered in. The chip is nicely positioned between power and ground. Okay, and the only other thing we would want to do, and we have to do this with every chip, is that we've got some conductor between the chip legs, and that needs to be broken out using a track breaker. So there's 4 of these that we need to do on this one. And just break those tracks. So don't forget to do this step, and then give it a bit of a clean after, because it's very easy to get little copper flecks. Just bridge over and short circuit the pins, which is the last thing you want to happen, because then your circuit simply won't work. There we go. Yeah, like that. Hopefully you can see that. The next thing to do is to look at the circuit diagram, and I'm going to connect the powers first of all. So I'm going to get a red wire, and I'm going to run that from power to pin 4 and from power to pin 8. That will be the first thing I do. So I'll see you in a minute. So we've made a bit more progress with our circuit now. I've connected the power from the power line, which I've also connected in a battery. We're going to use a battery with this. And we've got power to pin 8, we've got power to pin 4, and I've also put the ground down from pin 1 down to ground. Now at this stage it would be a really good idea if you adopt a couple of practices. The first one is to try and use some type of colour coding. So I've used red for power and black for ground. It doesn't really matter which colour coding you use for your own circuits, but it's just a good principle. Another good thing is to try and keep these leads and wires as short as possible. We don't want loads and loads of wire hanging out. It looks very messy and it makes your circuit very difficult to troubleshoot later on. After that, of course, what we should really be doing is checking to see that we've got connections where they need to be. And to do that, the best way to do that is to use something called a multimeter, which I've got set up here. And this one's just to do, all I'm going to do with this really is some continuity testing. And I've got it set to continuity there. One lead to voltage, ohms, hertz, the other one to common. And hopefully I can just pop that there so you can see it. So when I short both the leads together, you're going to hear a tone. That's the first thing. So the first thing I will check is I'll go from the battery connection to pin 1 and I should hear a tone. That means I've got a connection there. There we are. Secondly, I will go from the power connection here to pin 8 and pin 4. Great. And finally, and you should do this every single time you take a couple of steps, I'm going to check to make sure that everything's okay with the chip holder. So I'm going to go between each of the connections where the pins are going to go in, like so. And I'm also going to go across to make sure that I did those track cuts properly. And if I hear a tone, that means that I've got a short circuit and I've got to do something about that. But at this point, there is no tone. So I'm reasonably assured that so far so good. Next thing to do is to get our 555 timer, which I can't find. And I said earlier my eyesight's rubbish. I'm just going to quickly check that that is a 555. So this is an important thing to do because students often mix chips up in the wrong pigeonholes. I think that's a 555 timer. Yeah, it is. Difficult. Anyway, I really hope you can see this, but on the 555 timer itself, it's right close, we can see there's a semicircle and there should be a little dot at the corner with my little fingers pointing at. That's pin 1 and it counts counterclockwise from there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So every single pin, every single chip that you use will follow that same protocol. And then it's just simply a case of making sure that you've got all the legs properly lined up and you can then pop your chip into the holder. This one is not great. One of the legs was already bent. And surprise, surprise, I fucked it up. Which is a good thing that I brought another chip with me. Hopefully this time, just double check again. Yeah, this one's a 555. Confidence is high that this one's going to work. There we are. So before you press the chip home, just make sure each leg's properly situated, and then pop it in and press it. Okay, next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 10k resistor from power, and that's going to go into pin 2 of my 555 timer, and then I'm going to go to from pin 2 to a switch to ground. So I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so now I've got the switch in. We can see we've got a 10k resistor from power that goes into pin 2, and then I take a little link line down to our switch, and then the switch connects along ground here. Now it's really important, I hope you can see this, I will show, I've got a little drawing down there. It's important that you get the switch orientated correctly. So we've got two little silver connections here and here, here and here. They must be this way round. If they're not, your switch will just short circuit and it won't work. And the switch is the thing that triggers the 555 timer to create a pulse, and later on we're going to be using some other circuitry to count that pulse. So you've got to get that switch right. And in keeping with everything else I've been showing you as we've been going along, what we would want to do at this stage is make sure that switch is operating correctly. So once again, continuity testing, and I take one pin to the top and one pin to the bottom of the switch, and you can see as I press the switch there and operate it, we can hear the tone. That means that the switch is operating correctly at this point. And the next thing I'm going to do from the drawing, I'm going to do this side of the 555 timer. So all this side's done now. I'm going to connect a 10k resistor into pin 7, and then a 10 microfarad capacitor down to ground. And from the drawing, I'm hoping you can see that we've got pins 6 and 7 which are connected together. So I'm just going to use a wire to do that. 10k resistor into 7, and from 6, 10 microfarad capacitor down to ground. That'll be next. Hello again. So at the last time I spoke to you, we were going to connect a 10k resistor down to ground. We're going to connect pins 7 and 6 together, and we were also going to connect a 10 microfarad capacitor to ground. But also on this side, something I omitted to mention was that we go from pin 3 through a 330 ohm resistor, orange, brown, down through an LED down to ground. The LED is polarity dependent, and the capacitor is polarity dependent as well. The positive leg of both of them will be the longer leg of the two, so they're configured in such a way that the legs are longer on the positive side, and the positive must be connected above ground here, not to ground. If it is, it won't work, and in the case of the capacitor, likely to explode at some point, or at least not work. So the circuit that we've got here, it is now. Hopefully you can see this. I'll try and tilt it so the light hits it a bit better. A couple of things to note. Things were getting a little bit cramped here, and of course I've got to fit the LED and the resistor in as well. So what I did was I took a little link wire here, this little purple wire, onto its own track, make sure it's on its own track, and then further down the track I can connect the LED and then the resistor. The only thing to be a little bit wary of is that I've got a capacitor connecting here on its own track, I've got an LED on its own track, the resistor and the bottom leg of the LED are on its own track, and I've also got the switch here. So if I turn this over, you can see, hopefully there's quite a lot of activity going on these tracks here, and we need to make sure that none of them actually connect together. Now the easiest way to do that at this point is to test a circuit, which is what I'm going to do. So this particular circuit is going to use CMOS logic later on, so we can just use a 9-volt battery, which is what I'm doing here. A couple of things. When you connect the battery up, if there's a sort of catastrophic problem with your circuit, the battery is going to actually get quite warm quite quickly. You'll feel it. Your circuit won't work, of course, but that's beside the point. This one feels nice and cool to touch. So what should happen is that when I press the switch, the LED will light. That will create a pulse. When I let go of the switch, the LED will shut off. Now, this is configured in such a way to turn on and turn off quite quickly, but I can make that LED sound for a lot longer by adjusting or increasing the value of this capacitor here and this resistor here. They are the two things that determine how long it takes for the LED to stay on. But because we want to create a short pulse in this circuit, we've made this in such a way that it will come on and shut off quite quickly. So I'll shut up now and press the button, and there you can see the LED coming on, creating a pulse. Just while we're here though, just so that well, camera ran out of memory, so I've had to delete some of my wonderful music videos. Anyway, not to worry. So just while we're here, we can also check, and this will come in useful later on, the voltage at certain points of the circuit. So to do that, it's a DC circuit. We're going to select 20 volts as being our maximum voltage. This is a 9-volt battery. And all I'm going to do this particular time is I'm going to pop the ground lead, the common lead, that's going to go to ground. And I'm just going to go to pin 4, and there should be voltage there, pin 4, yeah, 9.42 volts. That's a nice healthy battery there. And also here at pin 8, it's a little bit finicky, but there you are, 9.42. Come on, you can do it. There we go. And then also on pin 3, there should be 0 volts on pin 3, but if I operate the battery, that should be reading the voltage, but it's not. Probably the connection is a little bit difficult to make. There we go. Yes. There we go. So that just goes to prove that the circuit works. We've done some continuity testing on it, and we've checked the voltage at various points. And now the next thing to do is to make the next part here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make all of that and then come back and explain exactly what went on into making it. It's going to be made at this part here, and then later on we're going to situate the 7-segment display down here, but the next part of the circuit is going to go there. See you in a bit. Hello again, nearly there now. So the part of the circuit, hopefully you can see this, is quite gloomy outside, and I haven't got my cameraman with me. But this is a bit we've made, the CD4026BE. It's a decade counter. If you trace this, you can see, and I'll try and do it with you, but we can see that we've got 16 goes up to power, and also 3 goes directly to power, 8 goes down to ground, 2 is tied to ground through a 10k resistor, and 15 is tied to power through a switch, but also to ground through a 10k resistor there. So quite a lot going on. On the chip itself, pin 1 down to 8, 9 to 16. We've got 3 connected to power there, 16 connected to power. This track runs all the way along, remember, so the switch is connected to the track, to the power track, and the other side of the switch, exactly the same as this one here, the other side of the switch is then linked down into pin 15, and 15 goes through a 10k resistor down to ground, and 2 through a 10k resistor down to ground. On the other side, what I want you to note is, yes, I've done all the cuts here to make sure that there's no short circuits across the pins, but I've also isolated this side of the circuit from this side by cutting out the track, except for the ones ground here and just here. So there shouldn't be any joins there at all coming over. The other bit to mention is that pin 3 of the 555 timer is connected to pin 1 of the counter, and that's achieved here as we come out pin 3 and comes along this track, then it joins up here. Now I've got a funny feeling looking at that I've put that in a track too far up. I told you about my eyesight earlier, but that's quite easy to fix. All I'll do is I'll take a little join of solder across, and then I'll cut the track here so that it does not interfere with the 555 timer, and that should hopefully fix the problem. And then from there we're going to go on and finish off the 7-segment display. But before I do that, although you can't see anything working, it's still worth doing your continuity checks. Okay, so you go between each of the pins very quickly and go across the pins, no short circuits. Check that you've got your power here, so we go power to 3 and power to 16, and make sure that we also go down to ground as well. And that will tell you with about 90% accuracy whether your circuit to this point is healthy or not. The next step before you go hell for leather wiring the whole thing up is actually to do a functional check. So we've got to a situation where I've put the 7-segment display in, and I've connected one of the connections to the 7-segment display. So one of the things I did earlier was I traced the circuit diagram, which may be a little bit difficult for you to see, but you will see, if you can trace it, that 6 should connect to pin 9 of the 7-segment display, 7 to pin 10, 9 to 2, and so on from there. The 7-segment display, you can get the connections from the data sheet, but just for brevity, I've kind of sketched it out here, and we've got the little dot down in this right corner. That's pin 5, so it's 1 to 5, 6 to 10. Okay. Now, therefore, this is going to be pin 1 here. Pin 1's going to be about there. Pin 5, 6 to 10. This is 6 is on this side, so it makes sense to orient the 7-segment display in such a way that we don't get as many crossbars as possible. Otherwise, you could end up with a right tangled mess. So that's what's going to happen here. 6 come down to 9, 7 will come down to 10, and there may be some crossovers this side, but perhaps only 1 rather than in some of the circuits I've seen 7. Yeah, 7 crossovers is a load. The other thing to note on our 7-segment display is that pins 3 and 8 are connected together. So on the back here, whilst I've cut the tracks, I've left the middle track, the one that connects 3 and 8 together, intact. That means I don't have to use an extra wire. And also pin 3 connected to pin 8 is connected to ground through a 330 ohm resistor. And on this side here, I've used pin 8 and I've gone up to ground from there, and as far as I can see, that's all fine. So the next thing to do is just a functional check. So I've got the battery connected. You will get a situation where each of the segments of the 7-segment display won't be on all the time. It depends which number is being displayed. So what should be happening here is that it isn't on all the time, and as I cycle through it will switch on and switch off. That will tell us that all of our circuit is functioning to that point, and it should then be a case of just connecting the wires, remaining wires from the decade counter to the 7-segment display. Let's have a look. Yes. So if fortune is with us, as far as I can tell at the moment, this is working fine. So I'm going to go through, we're going to connect up the rest of the wires, and then we'll check to see where we are. We'll also check to see what happens with this, because this is, and we can see that's working because I just pressed it. And if I leave that in an off state, when I press this, this resets the 7-segment display to 0, like that. And there you are, that's working. So the only other thing now is to get all those wires connected up and then give it one final check. Okay, so here we are right at the end. What I would like to show you is that I've color coded the wires. You can use whichever code you want, but it makes it a lot easier to trace if you lay these things out properly. It just take a little bit of time. Less haste, more speed, as they say. And finally, we've got it connected up to a battery. The battery is not getting warm, which is a good sign. And of course, the 7-segment display is lit up. It starts at 0. And then we can just cycle through to see if it's worked. So what should happen is you go from 0 to 9 and then return to 0. So one more, just slowly. There's a little glitch there between 7 and 8. Maybe that's just me. There, it's just me. Okay, and then I'm just going to put it, say, 3, and then when I hit the reset button, back to 0. And it took about, even with this video, about an hour to make. So the point of doing this is to discover electronics, to have some fun, not to be afraid of making mistakes, and to improve your skills. And when you get good at this, even sort of moderately complicated circuits, I suppose, which this would be for a beginner, can be made quite quickly and you know, quite accurately. Okay, bye bye.